Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast, Tips by Will. Now, tonight or today, whatever time you are watching this video, we are tackling a question that many Jamaicans have been asking. If we pay taxes, which is education tax, why does the government keep saying there isn't enough money for education? Now, is the education tax not working? Now, the question is how much money is actually collected and where does it go? And can the Ministry of Finance honestly say it cannot fund education? So let's break it down. What exactly is the education tax? Now, many Jamaicans see deductions on their pay slips every month, but they don't fully understand what they are paying. The education tax was introduced in Jamaica to help finance the country's education systems. Now, employees and employers contribute through payroll deductions. The tax is administered by the government and paid into the Consolidated Fund, which means it becomes part of the government's overall revenues. Now, this is where the first misunderstanding begins. Now, many people assume that every dollar collected from the education tax goes directly into schools. That's not exactly how government finance works. The education tax contributes to the government's revenue, but education spending is ultimately determined through the national budget process. So in other words, collecting education tax does not automatically mean the Ministry of Education receive the exact amount collected. So how much is Jamaica spending on education? Now we're going to look at the bigger picture. First, recent international and government data show that Jamaica spends approximately 5.5% of GDP on education, and around 17.9% of total government expenditure goes towards education. Now, that's actually a relatively high percentage compared to many countries. So Jamaica spends a lot on education. In fact, a public expenditure review conducted by the government of Jamaica, the World Bank and UNICEF concluded that Jamaica's level of education spending is relatively high by regional and international standards. The report argued that the challenge is not necessarily the amount being spent, but how efficiently it is being spent and whether it is producing the desired educational outcomes. Now, that finding is important. Why? Because it suggests the issue may not simply be not enough money. It may also be about how money is allocated and used. So, next question. How much education tax is collected? Now, here's where things become complicated. The government publishes overall tax revenues, but it's often difficult for the average citizen to identify exactly how much revenue comes from education tax alone in a given fiscal year. What you do know is that Jamaica's national budget is over $1.3 trillion, with government revenues approaching $1 trillion annually. Now, education tax represents only one source of revenue among many, including GCT, income tax, corporate taxes, custom duties, property taxes, payroll taxes, education tax. Now, the Minister of Finance pulled these revenues together before allocating funds through the annual budget. Now, this means the question is simply, how much education tax was collected? The bigger question is, how much money was allocated to education after all revenues were collected? So, where does education spending actually go? Now, when most people think of education spending, they imagine classrooms and teachers. But the education budget covers much more than that. Some major areas include teacher salaries, administrative staff salaries, school maintenance, utilities, transportation programs, school feeding programs, textbooks and learning materials, early childhood education, secondary schools, technical and vocational institutions, universities and tertiary support, infrastructure projects. There's a lot. And a large percentage of education expenditure is consumed by what? Wages and salaries. Now, that is not unique to Jamaica. Education systems worldwide are labor intensive. You need teachers, you need principals, you need guidance counselors, you need janitors, you need security personnel, and you need support staff. As salaries rise, education costs rise. As inflation rises, education costs rise. As school population grow, education costs rise. So you get the picture. So Why does the Ministry of Finance say there isn't enough money? Now let's address the headline issue. When the Ministry of Finance says there isn't enough money to fully fund education demands, that means necessarily that there is no money for education. It usually means there isn't enough money to satisfy every request coming from the education sector while also funding everything else government must do. The government must simultaneously fund healthcare, national security, roads and infrastructure, public sector wages, social welfare programs, debt payment, disaster preparedness, agriculture, housing, education. And Jamaica still carries significant debt obligations. Now, you see, every dollar spent servicing debt is a dollar that cannot be spent elsewhere. Now, this creates competition among ministries during budget preparation. So when the Ministry of Education requests additional funding, the Ministry of Finance has to balance those requests against every other national priority. The real question Jamaicans should be asking, perhaps Jamaicans have been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking where is education tax, maybe we should ask, are we getting value for the money already being spent? Remember, Jamaica allocates nearly 18% of government expenditure to education. So billions of dollars are allocated to education. Yet many concerns remain. Literacy rate in some schools, very low. Numeracy performance, very low. Teacher shortages, infrastructure challenges, preparation gaps, school violence, student absenteeism, truancy. So if spending is relatively high but outcomes are still disappointing, then efficiency becomes a critical issue. Now, the World Bank and UNICEF review highlighted exactly this concern. Now, whether spending is adequately targeted and whether it is translated into better educational outcomes. Could the education tax be used more transparently? Good question. Now, one criticism often heard from taxpayers is that the lack of visibility. Now, many Jamaicans can see the deduction on their payslip, but they cannot easily see how much was collected, how much was allocated, which schools benefited, what outcomes were achieved. Now, greater transparency could help build public confidence. Now, imagine if every year Jamaicans receive a simple report showing education tax collected X billion of dollars, spent on teachers X billion of dollars, spent on school repairs X billion of dollars, spent on technology X billion of dollars, spent on student support programs X billion of dollars. Now, that level of transparency would make it easier for taxpayers to judge whether the system is working. So, can the Minister of Finance legitimately say it cannot fully fund education? Technically, yes. Why? Because every ministry is competing for limited resources. However, Jamaica is always spending a significant share of its national budget on education. Now, the evidence suggests that the debate should not focus on only how much money is being spent, it should also focus on how effectively that money is being used. Now, the education tax was created to support education, but collecting taxes is only the first step. The real measure of success is whether those funds produce better schools, better teachers, better student outcomes, and ultimately a more productive Jamaica. So, what's your thoughts? Comment below, share, subscribe. A lot of you persons watching my videos and you're not subscribers, so subscribe from now, hit the notification bell so you can see whenever I load a new video. Okay? Have a wonderful day now. My name is Tips by Will. I'm out.